So this is a divergence from my other more pragmatic videos. I've had some ideas about the great empire of the dawn and the origins of the first men. This is the long distant history of the planet, and many stories have come down through millennia. Not all are factual, but the fact that the author fleshed these ideas out at all and included them in his oeuvre of the Song of Ice and Fire makes them more meaningful. Our stories from the Neolithic and such have come down to us through the fog of history in our own world. George's stories may be meaningful as a misdirect, or they may be a version of the truth rhyming with the history of the current time, but hopefully they are not a waste of his time. Let's look at this video as Paramore's fairy tales or fables. So tuck yourselves in under your tinfoil blankets and let's get started. The origin stories of this world's civilization begin with the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light. When Arya entered the House of Black and White, she saw a statue of a man with a lion's head seated on a throne carved in ebony. 30 different gods stood along the walls, surrounded by their little lights. The weeping woman was a favorite of old women. Arya saw rich men preferred the Lion of Night. They have a child who is known as the God on Earth. He may have gotten his name from his penchant for playing God and messing with genetics and science in the lands beyond the mountains of the Morn. In the beginning, the priestly scribes of Yin declare all the land between the bones and the freezing desert called the Grey Waste, from the Shivering Sea to the Jade Sea, including even the great and holy Isle of Lang, formed a single realm ruled by the God on Earth, the only begotten son of the Lion of Night and Maiden Maid of Light. When Dorea tells the story she believes to be about the birth of dragons, she says, "Once there were 2 moons in the sky, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat." If we look at this as cultural memory, there may have been a time when there was a second moon that was destroyed, raining meteors and caused a sort of nuclear winter event. 1,000 dragons poured forth and drunk the fire of the sun. These pieces of meteor, either from the moon or the object that collided with it, were a form of radioactive magical objects. They crashed into the planet, throwing a pyroclastic mixture that blotted out the sun for years and extinguished much of the life that had established itself. It would get colder, freezing the polar caps, capturing water, and lowering the sea level for a long time. If this was around 10,000 years ago, it would be the time of the God on Earth, the alchemist, working from the city of Kadath, due east of the Dothraki, womb of the world. He would be called upon to feed the people during this time of crisis and help reestablish the planet's biodiversity. Kadath is east of the Bleeding Sea and north of the land of the Shrikes. Farther to the southwest are the 5 forts. To the southeast of Kadath are Bonetown and the Dry Deep, while the northeast is the Grey Waste. And even the Shrikes supposedly lived in terror of Kadath, in the Grey Waste, a city said to be older than time, where unspeakable rites are performed to slake the hunger of mad gods. Does such a city truly exist? If so, what is its nature? He would discover that in proximity to these fallen pieces of moon rock, even his interspecies experiments succeeded. His proximity to these stones also extended his life. He was always around them, so his reign was in the vicinity of 10,000 years. When the sun was blotted out in the sky for years with no warning, the people needed the help of this alchemist to survive. He engineered foodstuffs to withstand the lack of warmth and light. For instance, their dormancy periods were extended or eliminated. He was lauded as a god and traveled about his domains in a palanquin carved from a single pearl and carried by 100 queens, his wives. He fathered children with eyes of pearl gray, jade green, topaz blue, amethyst purple, onyx black, etc. He experimented with his children like he did the plants and animals, creating and manipulating the dynasties that would rule after him, as Oberon did with his sand snakes. He put in the time and effort to tame wyverns, turning them into sort of unpredictable pack animals. When the skies cleared and the sun returned, the polar caps began to melt, and the seas began to slowly rise. People began to see his experiments as no longer necessary and scary. The wilder cousins of wyverns exist still in Sothorios. It seems, in order to tame them, he mixed their blood with the blood of his children and vice versa, back and forth, tempering the genes. His children with purple eyes worked the best. The process turned his children's hair white. He saved his people, and his successes made him loved for a very long time. However, this power in the millennia that followed would eventually corrupt him. When the people were safe, he continued his experiments, starting to play with mixing people and animals for the lulz. His extended life gave him the time to see to fruition this type of Dr. Moreau-esque experimentation. We have tales of odd beings from this area of the world. Winged men are said to have leather wings and able to fly like eagles. Shrikes are said to be half human beings with green-scaled skin and venomous bites. They supposedly fear the city of Kadath. Fireworms are creatures that breathe fire but have no wings. They have no love for men. Although they do not breathe fire, wyverns have great leathery wings, cruel beaks, and an insatiable hunger. They are more ferocious than dragons, if smaller in size. The bloodless men are said to exist in the further east of Essos, and are described as pale as the dead. Others claim they are corpses who have been drained of blood and returned to life through dark rites. Jogwin was the Dothraki name for a race of giants that lived in Essos. Even the snow-capped northernmost peaks, known as Krajaz Zasqua, or White Mountains in the Dothraki tongue, where the cold winds come howling off the shivering sea winter and summer, were once home to the Jogwin, the stone giants, massive creatures said to have been twice as large as the giants of Westeros. Alas, the last of the Jogwin disappeared 1,000 years ago, only their massive bones remain to mark where they once roamed. Legend claims that it was the Jogosnai, led by the Jatar, the Jot of Jots, and war leader of the whole people, Garak Squintai, who slew the last of the stone giants of Jogwin at the Battle of the Howling Hills. The son and heir of the god on Earth, who would become the Pearl Emperor, sought to stop his father from his human eugenics program. People began to rescue their families away from his clutches. The god on Earth decided that he needed protection, as his children were asserting themselves as dynastic household heads looking for their own power. He mixed his wyverns with fireworms to have them breathe fire as dragons. Dragons exist in this fairy tale from these earliest times, but only as useful and once again highly temperamental and now dangerous pack animals. They were trained, but not controlled. Now that the Empire could travel vast distances quickly, the Empire established ports in Westeros, trading with the native population and then the First Men when they arrived. Battle Isle, the Iron Islands, Hardhome, Storm's End, Moat Cailin are possible places where they set up trading posts that traded with Asshai. The ports in Suthorius had a more difficult time thriving. The port city of Asshai became the capital of the Empire because of its size and wealth. When the god on Earth actually started to use the draconic nuclear weapons against his own people, Pearl Emperor decided enough was enough. He used the dragons and mammoths and giants to collect as many pieces of the magic rocks as possible, and with them and the fire of the dragons instead of mortar, he built the 5 forts, depriving his father of the magic and creating a barrier from the magical creatures that his father began to use against his people. He gave the people a place west behind the 5 forts to be safer from his father in an area that has the borders of the great empire of the Dawn we see documented, to keep the Lion of Night and his demons away from the realms of men. The god on Earth was curtailed. He ruled for 10,000 years until at last he ascended to the stars to join his forebears.